We're happy to have Dr. John Gowdy as our speaker today from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. John, I guess like most of our speakers, or all of our speakers so far, I wanted to check on this, but I didn't realize quite how eclectic and interdisciplinary his background was. He has a bachelor's degree in anthropology from American University, and then he got a master's degree in community planning from the University of Rhode Island, and got a PhD in economics from West Virginia University. After working for the energy office in what state was it? In New York, he then took up a job at RPI in the economics department, and he's been there ever since. And while at RPI, he developed the first, I'm not sure it's still the only, but it was the first. There's a couple others. It was the first PhD programs explicitly in ecological economics. So there are a few others besides that, a few other degree programs. We'll be doing a certificate program here at Vermont fairly soon. He was also a Fulbright scholar. He's also currently the president of the United States chapter of the Society for Ecological Economics. Again, let me remind you, I think all the faces I see are fairly familiar at this point, but how the questioning is going to go, we'll be passing out slips of paper for you to write your questions down for the speaker at the end. And we have our two student inquisitors here who will be summarizing the questions and relaying them to the speaker, along with a summary of the questions that were submitted over the web by the students taking the course. Okay, John, take it away. The topic is, we had listed at the beginning and at the end of conventional economics, but it's got a slightly different topic here, but I think it's going to be the same thing.
Okay, I'd like to thank you for inviting me, and I'm just getting over a cold, but my voice seems to be lagging behind the rest of me, so bear with me if I drink water and coffee and all that. I'm going to talk a little bit about economic theory. I know most of you are not economists, but there's some really important things going on sort of within mainstream economics, and there's really sort of two currents happening. One is sort of the disintegration of what's called welfare economics, or the new welfare economics, and this is really the basis of cost-benefit analysis and a lot of other things. So I think it's important to know what's going on there. And another is the development of fields of economics like behavioral economics and game theory that are really taking off. The last Nobel Prize winner in economics, Daniel Kahneman, was actually a psychologist. And the importance of this work is also, it sort of undermines this notion of rational economic man that's still behind most economic policies. Two things I'm not doing. I'm not defending neoclassical economics. I was accused of this the last lecture I gave. And I'm also saying that I'm not saying that you shouldn't put prices on environmental goods and services. I'm really arguing with only the way that it's done in conventional economics. And I hope this becomes clear during the lecture. Okay, about 10 years ago, a couple of economists named Albert and Cannell wrote a book called The Quiet Revolution in Welfare Economics. Okay, that was in 1990. And the revolution is not only continuing, but it's really becoming quite noisy. And one argument I'm going to make is that realistic models of human behavior are now coming to the forefront in mainstream economics, but that practitioners, especially in the field of environmental economics, are really lagging behind what's happening in the theory. And I'll take that even further and say environmental economics is particularly behind mainstream theory. Some fields of economics, for example, development economics, are now sort of at the forefront in developing models that include culture, environment, personalities, how people really make decisions. Part of the reason in welfare economics is sort of the dismal failure of traditional welfare policies that have caused such havoc around the world. And finally, I'll say, of course, that ecological economics has an opportunity to fill the void that's sort of being hollowed out within mainstream theory. Okay, this is a sort of an outline of the presentation. The new welfare economics began really in 1939 with a paper by Nicholas Kaldor. And this paper established something called the potential Pareto improvement. Most of you who are economists know the concept of Pareto optimality. That's just when you're in a situation of Pareto optimality, no further change or no further trading can make one person better off without making someone else worse off. So what's called a Pareto improvement in the economy, a particular policy, should be done under that criteria if at least one person is made better off and no one else is made worse off. Okay, I don't think anyone would disagree with that, but it's a pretty narrow criterion. There are not many policies that help everybody. I mean, almost all policies hurt someone and help another person. The potential Pareto improvement was meant to be a way around that. Okay, there's also sort of a growing literature in what's called endogenous preferences. Okay, the traditional welfare model treats human beings as isolated from culture, society, from each other. Thorsten Veblen had the best term for this. It was human beings were treated as homogeneous globules of desire, sort of hanging in time and space. Well, and everything was exogenous or outside of the person. Endogenous preferences mean that people are influenced by friends, family, by cultural traditions, and so on. You know, these things are, I tell my non-economist friends about these new theories, and they sort of, you know, shake their heads. But anyway, this is what's happening. Okay, then I'll say something about, probably in the lecture with taking these things into account. How does this affect environmental policy, ecological economics policy, and a reasonable valuation of environmental attributes? And I hope we can sort of end with a discussion of where this leaves ecological economics. What role can we play as ecological economists? Okay, this new welfare economics is really enshrined in what's called the fundamental theorems of welfare economics. Okay, the first fundamental theorem really asserts the efficiency of competitive economies. If all firms and individuals are selfish price takers, you know, independent actors, there's a bunch of other things, then a competitive equilibrium is Pareto optimal. Okay, you'll get to the point where no one can be made better off without getting someone else, making someone else worse off. Okay, the second fundamental theorem is really what lies behind most economic analysis and most economic policy. And basically, that says that almost any Pareto optimum can be achieved with appropriate government policies. If we see a potential improvement in the economy, then we can do this through what's called lump sum transfers and taxes. And again, this is a quote by a person that's written a lot about, one of the top theorists in economics. It's no exaggeration to say that the entire modern microeconomic theory of government policy intervention, including cost-benefit analysis, is based on this second theorem. Okay, a key to this, again, is this thing called a potential Pareto improvement. It's really a key concept and what I'm going to talk about in most of this lecture. Okay, if the magnitude of the gains from moving from one state of the economy to another, again, think about particular economic policies, environmental policies, income distribution, whatever. If the magnitude of the gains is greater than the magnitude of the losses, then social welfare is increased by making this move, even if no actual compensation is made. And this is the key thing. Economists have always been obsessed with being a science. And what this really moves into is the claim that economists deal with efficiency and distribution, welfare, things like that, or leave that up to the politicians. I think it was Robert Heilbronn who said that the greatest fear lurking in the heart of every economist is the fear of being a sociologist. So this is, you know, we really try to make this a scientific discipline. And again, this is called the Hicks-Kaldor criterion. And this is what distinguishes the old welfare economics of Alfred Marshall and Pigou from the new. Okay, I promised to keep these graphs to a minimum, but I think this will help. Okay, this is what's called a utility possibilities frontier. Now, the problem with the Pareto criterion is that Pareto efficiency depends on the initial distribution of goods, even in these hypothetical economies. And again, what I'm going to talk about first is like pure theory. I'm going to show that you can't really do this in terms of the pure theory, making all the assumptions of homo economicus, perfect competition, and all that. Okay, so you have the utility of person 1 and person 2 on these axes. The further you are away from the origin, a straight line away from the origin, if you move on that line, you can make both people better off. So if you move from a position like x to x prime, that's a Pareto improvement, like a x double prime, I mean. That's a real Pareto improvement because both people are made better off. If you move from a point like x to x prime, you're helping person 1, increasing his utility, but you're decreasing the utility of person 2. Her utility goes down. But the argument that's made in this potential Pareto improvement criterion is that you should make the move from x to x prime, because once you're at x prime, then you can move along that frontier to x double prime. So it's a potential Pareto improvement. And again, the only job of economists is to say, okay, you move from x to x prime, and it's up to politicians to make sure this is fair and just. Does anyone have any questions about that, or is that okay? Now, if you haven't seen these things before, it's kind of tedious. Okay, Pareto's view was very different. I know Pareto's sort of taken a beating by a lot of economists and non-economists. He did work in Mussolini's government, things like that. But Pareto was actually very careful when he talked about income distribution. He said, if you want to make sure you have a just economy, then questions of distribution should be taken care of first, and then you move on to efficiency. Again, very unlike what happened after him. Okay, this is too long a quote for a PowerPoint. But anyway, he says that it's okay to move to a position that hurts someone and helps somebody else as long as you compensate the person that's being hurt. Again, the key thing is that he really insisted that compensation be made. But compare this to Nicholas Kaldor. This is a really very well-known quote about this idea of potential Pareto improvements. There's no need for the economist to prove that as a result of some policy measure that no one in the communities is going to suffer. In order to establish his case, that is, whether a policy should be implemented, it's quite sufficient for him to show that even if all those who suffer as a result are fully compensated for their loss, then the rest of the community will still be better off. In other words, the magnitude of the gains are greater than the magnitude of the losses. And then this is, he's talking about landlords, something called the Corn Laws. But this last sentence, whether or not compensation should actually be paid, is a political question on which the economist, as an economist, could hardly pronounce an opinion. Okay, this was, again, 1939, over 60 years ago. And since then, there's all sorts of theoretical difficulties that have been found with this potential Pareto criterion. It turns out that for a variety of reasons, you really can't apply it. It's theoretically impossible to compare two Pareto optimal points without making interpersonal comparisons of utility. And in fact, in most cases, you can't move from a non-Pareto optimal point to a Pareto optimal point without violating the basic conditions like transitivity and so on. Okay, then the second thing I'll talk about that's related to the stuff happening in endogenous preferences is that when cost-benefit studies are done, contingent valuation surveys and so on, these preferences are filtered through the axioms of consumer choice to make them fit economic theory. So preferences, actual human preferences, are actually distorted by these economic models. Okay, here's a diagram that shows something called the Skatowski paradox. Okay, suppose you're at a point like, keep thinking I'm going to point here, it's going to show on the screen. If you're at a point like X, ask yourself, should you move to a point like X prime? Okay, under the potential Pareto improvement criteria, you should do that. because if you move to x prime, then theoretically you're on that utility possibility frontier. You could move to a point like x double prime and make both people better off. So that's a potential Pareto improvement. And again, economists say, well, okay, whether that improvement's actually made is up to the politicians. So under this rule, you should move from x to x prime. But what if you're at x prime? You ask yourself, should we move to x? And the answer to that is also yes, because if you're at x, then you can move to x triple prime, and both people can be made better off relative to that starting position, x prime. Okay, this is sometimes, some guy referred to it as the country music paradox. You know, in country music, there are like two places you want to be, either home or away from home. You know, if you're away from home, you want to be home, and if you're home, you want to be away from home. So in economic jargon, this is called the cycling phenomenon, and it comes again because you're oops, not because of that. You're actually talking about two different positions on what's called a production possibilities frontier with different price ratios and so on. So anyway, it turns out you can't do this. There's something called the Boadway paradox. There's another writer, E.J. Michon, that's written about it. And so for 60 years, all these different paradoxes and proofs has really showed that you can't do this. Yes, skip that one. This is a production possibilities frontier, and the basic problem, again, with any initial distribution of these goods, x and y, you come up with almost an infinite number of Pareto optimal points, and so you can't really choose between those points. When you compare two Pareto optimal points, you're making assumptions about something called the marginal rate of substitution and the price ratios and so on. The price ratios will be different at all the points on there, which means you're not in what's called a general equilibrium position. And again, I hope this sort of, those of you that aren't economists, I hope you give at least a flavor of what this debate is all about. So again, one of the top theorists that's written a lot about this in terms of economic theory is Robin Boadway. And he says, furthermore, when comparing alternative projects or policies, the one with the largest net gain is not necessarily the best one in the compensation sense. So if you're comparing two policies using a cost-benefit analysis, and one turns out to have a larger gain than the other, you still can't say that the first one is better. I mean, this really knocks the stuffing out of a cost-benefit analysis. Another Nobel Prize winner a couple years ago that's written a lot about economic theory, the first fundamental theorem of welfare economics, asserting the efficiency of competitive economies is fundamentally flawed. Quite contrary to that theorem, competitive markets are almost never efficient. So anyway, if you look at the last 5 years, the Nobel Prize winners in economics, people like Stiglitz, Daniel Kahneman, Vernon Smith, Amartya Sen, these people that really were 10 years ago, that were almost on the outside as almost considered heretics, are now winning Nobel Prizes in economics for their work. So again, I know we have a long way to go to sort of cure neoclassical economics, but there's some at least encouraging signs. If you're interested in looking at this stuff further, there's a nice paper online by these two guys. They work in a Dutch university. And they very simply sort of look at some of the critiques of the new welfare economics. But anyway, they sort of say this: generations of students have learned that a potential Pareto improvement is an increase in efficiency, that maximum efficiency is achieved by general competitive equilibrium. Any departure leads to a loss in real income. And this has sort of been the backbone of liberal policies, that is liberal in the European sense, meaning conservative, neoliberal, and so on. These have been the backbone of policies for free trade, European integration, sort of trashing government intervention in the economy, and so on. All right, just to show you what I think I asserted at first, that environmental economics really lags far behind the rest of economics, and particularly the theory. This is from a paper that was presented at Resources for the Future, sort of on the frontiers of environmental economics. And again, these are top economists. Stavens is, I think, a chaired professor at Harvard, the author of one of the best-known readers in environmental economics. Okay, instead of the strict Pareto criterion, economists resort instead to seeking potential Pareto improvements in the Kaldor-Hicks sense. The world is viewed as being better off if the magnitude of the gains and the magnitude of the losses are such that the gainers can pay the losers and still be better off themselves. Note again that under the Kaldor-Hicks criterion, the change is considered to be an improvement whether or not the compensation actually takes place. Actual compensation of losers by winners is essentially left to the political process. I mean, this is almost, the phrasing is a little bit different, but it's almost word for word what Kaldor said in 1939. I mean, all this revolution, all this critique actually just never, never took place, never existed. Oh, yeah, okay. All right, a lot of welfare economics, neoclassical economics who write about sustainability look at sustainability in terms of this potential Pareto improvement. This is actually not, this equation is not as bad as it looks here. The goal of society in Nordhaus's climate model is to maximize per capita consumption or per capita income. That CT is just per capita consumption, P is the population. And then it's discounted at that row there is the discount rate, so which he takes as the current rate of interest, or his estimated current rate of interest. So again, you want to maximize, actually maximize output. And if you can make this non-declining through time, then that's a sustainable economy. And all in Nordhaus's model, all these assumptions of economic man, perfect competition, constant returns to scale, all these things are built in. Oh yeah, before you get that, yeah. Also in this model, there's no, just as it doesn't say anything about income distribution, nothing is said about product mix. That is, the output of everything is completely substitutable. And according to his model, the only sector of the economy that would be affected is agriculture, that is affected by climate change is agriculture. And since it's only 3% of gross national product, we can do without it. This is actually, there's a nice article by Herman Daly called When Smart People Make Dumb Mistakes. And I'm sure he'll talk about that when he comes. And other prominent economists have said the same thing. Schelling at Harvard, Wilfred Beckerman, agriculture is such a small part of national output that climate change can't have a big effect on the economy. So instead of eating, we can buy another SUV or whatever. Okay, really beating up on Stavens again, but this is similar to the Nordhaus equation. WT is just welfare through time. And to have a sustainable economy, this is the title of his paper, Welfare Economics and Sustainability. To have a sustainable economy, the requirement is that per capita consumption be non-declining. And again, he stresses this importance of efficiency. In theory, it may be argued that sustainability, I guess suppose he means environmental sustainability or whatever, is the most desirable goal. But it's more reasonable to aim for potential sustainability in the form of dynamic efficiency. Okay, there's a lot of jargon there, but what he's saying is that if you can increase G and P, then that's an improvement in terms of sustainability. Distribution doesn't matter, the composition of G and P doesn't matter. And then he says the efficiency criterion and related analytical methods are ultimately where the greatest strengths of economics lie. So again, in traditional theory, we separate efficiency from equity. Okay, I think this is the last graph, so I'll give you a break. Okay, this is what's called a production. These sort of concave lines bowed out, or that's a production possibilities frontier. And as you move out, that's an improvement, because through an efficiency improvement, some technological change or whatever, you can make more of both goods, X and Y. So as you move out on the lines that sort of look like this, then society is better off. Okay, that's an improvement in efficiency. These lines that are curved in like this represent social welfare functions. So it's some representation of the welfare of society. Turns out you can't do that either, according to the third fundamental theorem of welfare economics, or the arrow impossibility theorem. But suppose you're at a situation like B. Okay, you're producing about even amounts of good X and good Y. Okay, if you just use the efficiency criterion, then moving to a point like A would be an improvement because you're further out on this production possibilities frontier. And it's possible, if you're at A, to move to a point like C, where you're producing more of both goods, X and Y. But in this case, producing less Y and more X, you actually move to a lower social welfare function. It might be, for example, that good Y represents social goods like education, healthcare, things like that. Good X might mean spending money for like an war in Iraq, just to use a hypothetical example. Okay, but instead of moving to C, again, if you keep applying this efficiency criterion, you'll end up moving to a point like D, which is on an even lower social welfare function. So the upshot, again, of all these arguments, is that you really can't compare two situations, even among like two people making all the other assumptions of neoclassical economics, without making interpersonal comparisons of utility. You know, economists have to step in and make ethical judgments, value judgments, and what all these top theorists are saying is it's time for economists to sort of stop hiding behind the smoke screen of economic theory and make their assumptions explicit. Okay, so all that stuff, again, is coming from within mainstream economic theory, making all the assumptions of economic man, perfect competition, and so on. And it's showing that this system of potential Pareto improvement, cost-benefit analysis that's based on that is really not valid, again, even with all the other assumptions. Okay, another line of theory that's coming in, as I mentioned before, is coming from places like game theory and behavioral economics. And they're finding out that people really act and make decisions much differently than the traditional economic model says. For example, express preferences. People in evaluating environmental goods express something called lexicographic preferences. That means that something is absolutely preferred no matter how much of the other thing there is. In CVM estimates, for example, of the value of species, like blue whales, coyotes, or whatever, a substantial number of people either refuse to answer the question or put on like really high values. Whales should be protected no matter what the cost. Okay? Answers like that really drive economists crazy. Typically, in the earlier CVM studies, those preferences were thrown out as outliers, protest bids. And sometimes those amounted to as much as 30 or 50% of the survey. The more recent trend is to use something called bid cards, where you actually constrain the bids to a certain range, $0 to $100 or something like that. So again, you force people into this welfare context. The other things I'll talk about explicitly. Okay, these are some of these categories of what's called endogenous preferences. The endowment effect, I'll give you an example of that in a minute. Process regarding preferences. It turns out that people care a lot about the process of how a decision is reached. So, and sometimes a final decision that they might not agree with, they'll support it if they think the process is fair. Okay. See, psychologists already know this, but we're just learning it. Okay, another example is something called hyperbolic discounting. In CVM studies and economic studies, we assume straight line discounting. That is, if the discount rate is 6%, then that same rate applies, on out until the good disappears. The higher the discount rate, the less something is worth in the future. So this is really important in evaluating environmental features, like the Green Mountain Park or the Adirondack Park or something like that, that may have a relatively low value but last forever. Its value approaches zero just within a few years, 50 or 100 years, with any sort of positive discount rate. Hyperbolic discounting. Psychologists are finding out that people discount something pretty heavily the first few years, but after that it's worth about the same thing. So something might be worth significantly less in 5 years or 10 years, but after 50 years they put the same value on it as they did after 10 years. Same thing after 100 years and so on. And again, what I'm arguing is that economists really get their backs up saying, well, we don't tell people what to think, we take human preferences as sacrosanct, people know what they want. Well, I'm saying they don't do that because they force real preferences into these notions of economic man that really distort them. Okay, biased cultural transmission. Again, this is another thing that other social scientists know. There's a really interesting fellow now at Emory University named Joseph Henrich, who was actually started out as an economist and became an anthropologist. He's done a lot of cross-cultural studies about how different societies make decisions. Biased cultural transmission just means that in making a decision, deciding whether to go along with the policy or not, people focus on people they know and respect, like key leaders. And the majority will do what an identifiable small set of leaders do. And sometimes this is the right decision, and sometimes it's the wrong decision. But he uses that model to explain actually a lot of economic phenomena. Okay, this is the endowment effect. And again, this has been shown in really simple experiments. This was an experiment done by a fellow named Jack Knetch. And what he did, he had people fill out a survey. And as a reward for getting a survey, he gave one group at the beginning of a survey a coffee mug, and another group at the beginning of survey, he gave them a candy bar. And then he asked each group if they would be willing to trade. Okay, the people that got the coffee mug, 89% of them kept the mug, only about 10% or 11% switched from the mug to the candy bar. On the other hand, that people who got the candy bar, 90% of those kept the candy bar when offered to trade for the mug, only 10% traded. And he also had another group where he asked them to choose at the end, and it was pretty close, 56% picked the mug, 44% picked the candy bar. So this has been done in a lot of experiments. People place a higher value on something they already have than they do that they would pay to get something that they don't have. Okay, those of you that have taken environmental economics know there's a controversy over something called willingness to pay versus willingness to accept. Okay, willingness to pay is, again, how much would you pay to get something that you don't have? Willingness to accept is how much would you have to be compensated for the loss of something that you have. And economists make the assumption that those two things should be the same. Again, there's a large literature on this too. And so they use willingness to pay because it's easier. You can use market values. And this was actually recommended by something called the NOAA panel, headed by Kenneth Arrow. But anyway, in terms of theory, willingness to accept is what you should use because most environmental features, most projects involve a loss of some environmental attribute. And this is another reason why willingness to accept should be a higher measure. Oh yeah, and when surveys are actually done estimating both of them, the willingness to accept measures are really much higher by a ratio of 4, sometimes as much as 100 times higher. And part of it is because of this endowment effect. Again, there's been a lot of interesting experiments. I think Knetch also went to a shopping center and then handed out roses to people and then offered to buy them back. And, once you had this rose, you felt it was yours and you had to pay, that people had to receive a really high price to get it back. If he told them he was going to take the rose and destroy it, burn them, then most people wouldn't give them back or demanded some really high price. So, again, something that you have, you think is yours by right. Let me see what's next. Yeah, there's actually an article in the New York Times today about the ultimatum game. It's really a fascinating thing. The ultimatum game works like, okay, suppose I give you $100 and I ask you to share it with him. And you can give him as much or as little as you want, but if he doesn't like the offer, he can refuse it and neither one of you get anything. Okay, so one person gets some amount of money, is instructed to share it with the second person. The second person can reject it and nobody gets anything if he thinks the offer is unfair. Okay, if you act according to economic theory, according to economic man, and it usually is a man. Most women don't object to it being called a man because it's a creature that selfish and self-centered and all that. So if you act according to economic theory, then you would keep 99 and give him $1 if those are the units. And then you should be happy because, more is preferred to less, you have $1. But most people would reject that offer because it's not fair. And in fact, anything under 30%, at least in Western cultures, is usually rejected. The typical offer is around 40 to 45%. Actually, the modal offer is close to 50%. And it's being played, I mentioned this guy Henrich, it's being played in a variety of cultures around the world. Something like 15 or 20 what's called small-scale societies. And the results are, the interesting thing about it is the results are really culturally dependent. If you look at characteristics like gender, age, income, those don't affect the offers or the rejections. It's the culture that people come from. And you get, some of the results are surprising. They played it among a group of hunter-gatherers in Paraguay. And in that culture, people gave really low offers, 10%, and none of the offers were rejected. And if you know anything about hunting and gathering cultures, it's sort of built on sharing and reciprocity. And they started looking at this a little bit closer. And the explanation was that in these societies, if you give someone a gift, it's really like setting up a whole series of obligations. So it's not really, giving them something. It's sort of requiring them to reciprocate. And so that's why they gave, it was like being nice to them. You're giving them low offers so they didn't have to reciprocate and do something to you back. But anyway, this whole sort of cultural dependent of preferences is really important. And it's important to keep in mind, again, the difference. Most of economic theory is done in terms of an isolated individual. And you have to be really careful when you jump from individuals to a group. Take the assumption more is preferred to less. Okay, that's a reasonable assumption for like a single individual. I mean, if someone offers you a $100 bill, maybe some of you would turn it down, but I doubt it. I wouldn't turn it down. If an isolated individual, more is preferred to less. But suppose Bill Gates walked into this room and gave everybody $1,000 and gave you $1. Would you feel better off or worse off? Most of us would be complaining about that the rest of our lives. Someday we got screwed by Bill Gates. So social context is really important, and these are the kinds of things that coming out. I actually played this game last year in rural Nigeria, this village in what was formerly Biafra, and everybody gave 50%. These people, the average income was about $40 a year, and we played this game for $1, which is an equivalent of probably several days' wages. And they automatically gave half of it. Actually, a couple of people who thought they were wealthy, everybody else gave everything they had away. The dictator game is played the same way, except the person the second person can't reject the offer. And even in that game, the typical offer is around 30 or 35%. There's no reason in terms of being selfish, even in anonymous experiments. So this holds up. So again, this shows that cultures have some sense of fairness, and this is important in making economic decisions. They've also, altruistic punishment, they've also played this game called the public goods game, where you can either, at every round, you're given like $1. Say there are 10 players for 10 rounds. Beginning of each round, you can either take $1 for yourself or put it in a common pool and get 50 cents, and everybody else gets 50 cents. So if everybody does this, then it's like 50 cents times 10, so everyone would get $5 each round. If everybody's selfish, you get $1. But if you're selfish and everybody else is altruistic, at the end of the game, the 10 rounds, you have $55. Everybody else has $45. So there's an incentive to cheat. And depending on the conditions, whether people are allowed to communicate or not, for example, it either evolves toward competition, selfishness, or cooperation. And it's an interesting thing. If you call it one experiment, they called it the Wall Street game in one case, and everybody cheated, so it turned out to the non-cooperative solution. And another control group, they called it the community game, and everybody cooperated. So just, just that difference had this tremendous outcome difference. Anyway, that's altruistic punishment. A variant of the game is you're allowed to fine people who you think are cheating. And actually, that's what's happening in the ultimatum game. You're offered $1, you turn that down, you're actually paying $1 in order to punish the other person for being selfish. Yeah, public goods game. So anyway, all this stuff it's interesting because it's being published in the top economic journals like American Economic Review and Economic Journal and so on. Yeah, hyperbolic discount I covered. Yeah, this straight line discounting, I found this sort of interesting thing in an article. At a 6% discount rate, one human life today is worth more than 1 billion lives 500 years from now. So, when you sort of throw this, things like biodiversity loss, climate change, social stability, you make decisions regarding things like that in this economic framework. You really get on some ethically questionable turf. Okay, in terms of policy, this endowment effect suggests what's called a rights-based approach to environmental policy. There's an economist at Wisconsin called Daniel Bromley who's written a lot sort of from this point of view. And he says really in some of the major environmental questions that we face, what we really should look at it, the framework we should look at it is from the point of view of a regency. Like a king, underage king took power in England or somewhere. Then they had a regent, that oversaw his kingdom to preserve it for him until he became of age. So the current generation, in a real sense, acts as dictators over the future. And so Bromley argues it's really not a matter of how much of each thing we should preserve, but rather what we should preserve. So it's sort of a rights-based approach to policy. Yeah, process regarding preferences. There's a lot going on, especially in Europe. I think Sabine O'Hara must have talked about it in terms of discursive ethics, multi-criteria decision-making, something called citizens' juries to decide environmental policy. Some places in Europe, they actually set up a jury, with a judge and appoint different stakeholders to act as the jurors representing a certain interest, certain stakeholder groups. Okay, hyperbolic discounting, that would place a much higher value on preserving long-lasting environmental features, again, like climate stability, biodiversity, national parks, and so on. Okay. Yeah, okay. So I think a lot of this stuff really shows the demise of rational economic man. People do not necessarily respond rationally and predictably to price signals. So again, economists, the basic theme of environmental economics is getting the prices right, assuming that people will respond logically and rationally to those prices. And this new stuff in welfare economics and the endowment effect and so on, so that if people don't do that, then that sort of calls this exclusive reliance on those policies into question. Another thing is you can't really, distributional consequences can't be ignored. And, for example, the gasoline tax. Most environmentalists, I think, support a gasoline tax. And I'm not actually arguing against it, but I think there are questions raised about it. There's something economists have called the elasticity of demand, which for gasoline it's fairly low, which means I think something like 0.2. So a 10% increase in gasoline price would mean only a 2% decrease in gasoline use. And most of that use is really falls on the backs of the poor. They're the ones who really can't respond. They're the ones who are really affected by it. It's especially the bottom 20% of the population. So I would argue that if your goal is actually to reduce the use of gasoline and petroleum products, we need things like efficiency standards on cars and efficiency standards on appliances. That's a much more better way, I think, and a much fairer way. And the whole language of economics is sort of loaded too. Those are called command and control strategies versus free market strategies. So you want to be command and control and told how fast you can drive and so on. Okay, let me just wrap it up here. Again, I think in terms of welfare economics, the dam is broken and there's really little or any theoretical support for the policy prescriptions of most neoliberal economists. Obviously, there's going to be an extreme reluctance to give up these policies. Most economists say that efficiency is really the bailiwick of economics. But anyway, I think at least now neoliberal policies supporting free market environmentalism, dismantling the welfare state, and so on, this case will have to be made out in the open, not behind the smokescreen of economic theory. Okay, John Chipman, at least, is one of the top theorists, and this is really what he says. We can't make economic policy recommendations except on the basis of welfare judgments, and these should be made explicit. Oh yeah, justifications for free markets will get worse. There's this kind of weird thing happening in the United States, sort of quasi-religious reasons for believing in free markets. And George Gilder is probably the foremost spokesman of this. It's the entrepreneurs who know the rules of the world and the laws of God. I think a bestseller in the 90s was a book called Jesus CEO. So it's going to get worse. Yeah. Yeah, let me just end with these provocative statements. Environmental economics is one of the most backward fields of economics. I think these, again, what's happening in the mainstream really hasn't filtered down to practitioners. Some ecological economists are moving closer to environmental economics and these potential Pareto improvements just when this whole system is on the verge of collapse. I've had some heated debates with ecological economists on this. Okay, and another thing is prominent biologists and ecologists are being, I think, persuaded by this new welfare economics framework. I won't name any names either, but there are a couple of really prominent biologists on the West Coast that I've had these discussions with. But the economists they talk to are people like Kenneth Arrow and Partha Dasgupta have sort of convinced them of this approach. So, I mean, who are they going to listen to, me or Kenneth Arrow? I can't say, well, that guy doesn't know any economics, really. So it's sort of a tough road to hoe. Ecological economics is the only heterodox school of economics that emphasizes the fact that economies are contained within the natural world and within particular social systems. So again, I think our field is really poised to play a crucial role in reshaping all of economic theory. I think, and I really think that's happening. Again, I was just at a conference in Europe, and a lot of these things are taken for granted in Europe. Things like multi-criteria assessment, that's really the way they go in terms of making policy, getting more and more away from traditional cost-benefit analysis. Okay, thanks. I went over.
Thanks, John. If you can ask your questions to the aisles and to the other platform. And you guys, go ahead.
This is a question that was compiled from the reading. Classic economic principles seem to be hindering the public mainstream change to ecological economics. For example, the idea of endowment That is, people place higher values on things they already possess, and the discounting future, higher values placed on the benefits delivered in the near term, followed by a sharp drop and flattening in the medium term, so that the value of something stays fairly constant out into the distant future. We need to change to an economic system that is based on overall social values rather than focusing on immediate individual desires. The idea of satisfying immediate individual desires has to become a social norm, and changing well-accepted norms can be very hard. How can this change begin to take place? Government, education, advertising?
The changing the norms, it has to be government, it has to be really education, popular opinion, and so on. But I think sort of underlying that is, again, I think what I sort of really found out, and over the past year really reading heavily in welfare economics, is that people really hold some of these values. Part of it is not that values should be changed, but we need to find a way to express these values. I mean, people make different decisions as individuals than they do as members of a group. And yet, in terms of putting everything in terms of market incentives, people are responding as individuals, not as citizens. I'm going to give a long answer to this, but there's a really nice, at least his writings are nice, a guy named Mark Sygoff, who wrote a book called The Economy of the Earth. And he gives this example. There was, a few years ago, there was a plan by the Disney Corporation to make a ski lodge in a wilderness area in California. I think it was called Mineral King. And he did a survey, how many of students, but it was like 500 students, how many of you think this should be done? Should it be a ski resort or preserved as wilderness? And almost all of them said preserve it. I think there were 2 or 3 people out of 500 that said make it a ski lodge. Okay, then he asked the question, well, if it was made into a ski lodge, would you go there and ski? And of course, everybody says yes. If you restrict it to individual choice in a market context, it's the second decision that will come about. You know, people are expressing their preferences to have this ski lodge. When, in fact, people, if they could make a collective decision, if everybody else goes along with it, I'll do it, then they would have this result. So I think a lot of it is not so much changing attitudes, but giving people some way to express these collective decisions.
This question brought up several times by the audience. What distinction would you make between environmental economics and ecological economics?
Okay, I think environmental economics, again, the key distinction I would make, maybe it's because this is what I've been currently interested in, but this notion of a potential Pareto improvement and cost-benefit analysis. That is, putting a dollar value on things in terms of market context. Environmental economists the statement's made in any environmental textbook you pick up that, okay, people value a clean environment, but they also value, driving fast and new cars and new houses. And so everything is a matter of substitution and trade-off. So when you put things in a market context, $1 is just the same as another dollar. Everything is substitutable. And I think in ecological economists, for the most part, although some are close to environmental economists, but ecological economists insist that things called natural capital are different. They should be put in a different category. They're not substitutable, and they shouldn't be put to that framework of cost-benefit analysis.
This question is also from the audience. How much and what types of conclusive evidence will need to be presented in order to convince or persuade mainstream economists and/or politicians of the necessity to reevaluate policies and practices? Example, ecosystem valuations, willingness to pay surveys, assessment of real public growth.
Yeah, that's a tricky question too. If you look at contingent valuation surveys for environmental features, they're like really high. I mean, one reason for the Exxon Valdez settlement was the contingent valuation study that put the lost value at something like $2.8 billion, I think, or something like that. So these contingent valuation surveys, even though they're theoretically flawed from the point of view of welfare economics, can be really valuable politically. And I think these surveys are picking up something. I mean, they're picking up values people put on things, but they're not equivalent to market values. So I think if we somehow redesign these surveys and put them in context and somehow use these as evidence to how people really feel. But I don't know. I mean, the current political situation now is pretty bleak. So I don't know what it'll take. Another election.
Do you support efficiency as the guiding light to ecological economics? Efficiency seems to be the best way to go, rather than heavy taxes, because it takes the burden from the poor and puts it on corporations and wealthy elites.
Yeah, I think efficiency standards are, again, in terms of gasoline taxes and so on, maybe those are needed too. But I would favor efficiency standards over regressive taxes. The whole notion of efficiency is tricky too. I mean, efficiency is very important in terms of BTUs per GNP or whatever. But you also have to look at the totals, and this is something that Herman Daly will stress, I'm sure, when he comes. So it's not enough to say that we're becoming more efficient in using energy if the total keeps going up, which it has been.
With the PPI theory, in order for this idea to be more ecological, would the gainers have to become losers? Would we all, in a sense, have to become losers?
To make it operational, the compensation would actually have to be paid. I think that's sort of the key thing. The key break that Kaldor made was it's only a potential improvement. That's all economists can say. It's theoretically more efficient. It's theoretically more fair, and that's what the welfare theorists are saying. You can't do that. So again, to make it fair, you have to actually have compensation.
Will institutions such as IMF and the World Bank be able to put elements of ecological economics into practice within the current neoclassical system, or would the concept of ecological economics threaten these institutions, and would they therefore be reluctant to change?
You need to ask Herman Daly that question too. He worked at the World Bank for a long time. Had some bad experiences. I think from what I've seen, though, those institutions are under tremendous pressure to change. And whether they can do it or not, I don't know. Joseph Stiglitz, again, won the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago, has been absolutely trashing the IMF. His opinion is that it should just be disbanded and it should start all over with some other institution. I don't know.
I was intrigued to learn that the push towards ecological economics has occurred only in the last 10 years. What are the most effective means for advocating ecological economics? Who has the most positive response? Scientists, economists, politicians, or the general public? Have summits such as Rio and Kyoto been beneficial in promotion and implementation of ecological economics?
I think of course I'm an academic, and it's probably going to give a typical answer, but I think the strength of ecological economics is it's really its scientific validity as compared to neoclassical economics. I mean, neoclassical economics it really looks at how people make decisions in a market context without looking at physical reality. The field started really with, I would say, Bob might not agree, but I think it started with two economists, Nicholas Georgescu-Roegen and Kenneth Boulding, who really stressed the physical nature of production. Economic production uses resources and it puts out waste. So the strength of ecological economics, I think, comes from its sort of scientific orientation, especially from biology with people like Paul Ehrlich, the Odoms in Florida, who recently passed away. But they had tremendous influence and generated really hundreds of students, and with these sort of physical principles. So I think that's where the strength lies.
Traditional welfare economics want to leave the question of distribution to the politicians. Does the increased privatization of many public goods and services hinder equal distribution?
Yes.
The American culture has become very materialistic as the wealth of this nation has increased over the last few decades. The SUV has become the centerpiece luxury item. Americans love their SUVs and automakers continue to push them. This example of the endowment effect creates a significant barrier to ecological economics. As an alternative, hybrid cars offer a cleaner and affordable solution to traditional vehicles, but people seem averse to this change. How do you transform the status quo in terms of SUVs and greener vehicles and reverse the endowment effect to change not only the public, but the automakers too?
Yeah, SUV, I mean, it really shows the power of advertising. Actually, if you think of a commercial for a minute for an SUV, I mean, what do you think of? I mean, I think of a nice mountain scene or a lake in the mountains. I mean, it makes you want to buy an SUV if you really care about the environment, right? You can drive up to the mountain, you can set your tent up near this campfire with nobody around. I mean, it's really creating an image that's sort of independent of the effects of these things, you know. I think the power of advertising, it's really hard to overestimate in terms of the effect it has on all of us. I mean, you know, you find yourself in a store walking by something and reaching for it, and you think, what am I doing? It's just it's so in this power of buying, and more is preferred to less. It's just ingrained in you, and it's hard to get out. But yeah, if you look at sort of what the planet needs, it needs the West, the rich countries, to consume less. I mean, that's and it's a hard thing to sell.
Under game theories, would you say relative wealth is consistently more important than net wealth?
Yeah, this is another thing that's coming out in these studies, that relative wealth, this is something called the Easterlin paradox. An economist named Richard Easterlin's been doing this work for years. A lot of this stuff, if you're interested, is published in a journal called giee, the Journal of the Journal of Economic Behavior and Organization. Thank you. But he had actually a special issue of that journal on what's called the wealth effect or the Easterlin paradox. After you reach a certain point, it's your relative position that's important, not the absolute position. There's another guy, Fred Hirsch, that's written a lot about this. Yeah, that's another argument that that Western societies can reduce consumption and still be as well off. There's a nice book by Juliet Shore called The Overworked American. And again, if you look at the relationship between happiness and wealth or income, it's not that strong after you pass a certain point. According to Juliet Shore, happiness peaked in the U.S. About 1957. So I think I was born then, but I wasn't really old enough to know if I was happy or not. And she calculated that if we stopped economic growth, have that level of per capita income of 1957, and instead of taking the increase in technology and efficiency and more wealth, but took it in time, everybody could work, I think it was 18 hours a week or something like that, and have that standard of living. So, and again, I think this is the kind of thing that if you could actually make a collective choice and do, most people would agree to it. Maybe I'm wrong.
This is a question from the reading. If you were king for a day, which U.S. institution would you change and how? What new institutions would you create?
Oh, man. Am I going to answer that? Well, the obvious thing is the amount of money we spend on the military. If you call that an institution. But, the war, I was just listening to the news on the way up, and according to the Bush administration, the war in Iraq will cost $100 billion. And I think that, if I calculate it right, it's about $3,000 per person. And that's probably an underestimate. Actually, I just trashed William Nordhaus, but he's been very vocal in trying to publicize some of the cost of the war in Iraq. He wrote a nice article in the New York Review of Books. So again, if you look at the sort of the lopsidedness of military spending versus money on social programs protecting the environment and so on, it's just incredible. And related to that, I think it's sort of the worldwide distribution of income. I read another newspaper article that I think the top 365 people, single people in the world, have as much income as the bottom 40% of the world's population. So top 365 have as much income as, about the bottom 2 billion people. So there's plenty of money around to do everything that needs to be done, I would argue.
What are the best tactics that could be used to sell an instant gratification society on a new worldview such as ecological economics? What could be done to fix the problem of hyperbolic discounting?
Yeah, changing society. Again, the pressure, it seems to me the greatest pressure is advertising, especially if you have children. I mean, I don't know if, I had one child, and, it's just, you can deny yourself stuff, but if, if all the other kids on the block have a toy, it's really hard to say no, I think, and there's really a conscious effort, I think, to sort of indoctrinate kids when they're very small into wanting things. I mean, there are even games like shopping games. One of my daughter's friend had this game shopping, and the goal was to have as much stuff in your shopping cart as you possibly could. So they're trained at a very early age to shop and buy and consume.
This is also kind of about consumption. You spoke in the article how ecological economics will deal with the treatment of uncertainty. This means realizing that people all over the world like to know for certain that they will be able to live another day. In America, we overdo this uncertainty by buying too much. Do you believe that people can be certain about their future without over-consuming, thereby living in a sustainable way?
Yeah, and I think social policies can be very important here, like having a decent healthcare program, retirement programs, and so on. That would make it possible, I think, for people to actually choose to work less and live on less income. And if you didn't have to worry about retirement, if you didn't have to worry about healthcare when you got old, that would really free up people, I think, to take more leisure time rather than sort of piling up money for future consumption. And unfortunately, most of the world seems to be going the other way. Even some of the old social democracies in Europe are in the process of dismantling a lot of their social programs. It's sort of a race to the bottom in terms of that.
And finally, maybe we might have time for one more. How do you see the future of ecological economics?
Again, I think it's really poised to make a difference, and I think we're taking some stands on things now that can be really important. This whole issue of valuation is important. The whole thing about substitution, recognizing that some things should be preserved absolutely and not subject to trade-off. Again, in Europe, ecological economists are really having a big impact on policy. Probably, I would say it's even stronger than conventional environmental economics, for a number of reasons. But, and I think it's starting to happen in this country. Some of the major funding agencies, like Environmental Protection Agency, the National Science Foundation, are starting to take these things seriously. And it seems like interdisciplinary work is finally catching on, at least in academic terms. And I really haven't said much about sort of non-academic organizations, but there's some really great organizations out there that are being influenced by ecological economics, particularly the Nature Conservancy. That's one I know a lot about because my first PhD student is director now for the Australian program of the Nature Conservancy. Her job is actually to fly around looking at national parks in Australia, New Zealand, and the South Pacific. But they're really using participatory techniques to get like local community leaders, local villages to preserve biodiversity and so on. So I think there's some good things going on with NGOs.
Last one. Or are we done? We already asked them. So
Yeah.
okay. We'll finish our time.